Welcome, folks, to the Node.js and Oracle Database Office Hours session. Don't intend to show you anything you can't already do today. I don't plan on talking about anything related to future versions of note-oracledb, but in case I slip, don't make any purchasing decisions based on what I say. So who are we? On the line today, myself, Dan McGann, as well as Blaine Carter. We're both developer advocates at Oracle. Anthony Tuninga is here as well. He's the lead developer on note-oracledb. Chris Jones is not with us at the moment. Not sure if he's going to make it today, but he is the lead on top of not only note-oracledb, but several other scripting drivers as well. Hopefully he'll show up here in a little bit. For the folks that are new to Office Hours session, we're obviously using Zoom to host these sessions. And just a quick review on that, we ask that you mute yourselves, generally speaking, but you can unmute yourselves to ask questions. There's also the ability to use chat, which is probably the better way to ask questions. So feel free to ask questions at any point in time. We'll start off with an icebreaker theme and then leave any remaining time open for your questions. The theme for this month, sort of a continuation of what we were doing for several previous months, although there was a little brief break there for last month. But we were talking about file uploads and exploring different ways that you can do it, starting with the simplest, which is buffered, and then we went into using async iterators, and today we're going to look at transform streams. But just a quick review here. So what we're really talking about or dealing with in all three of these different patterns is separation of concerns between controller and database logic. So of course your controller logic is going to be aware of the HTTP server, the request and response objects, how those work and need to be used, as well as the database APIs that you'll expose in your database logic. Now the database logic, on the other hand, is going to have no idea of what an HTTP request and response are. It simply does what it needs to do when passed the correct parameters, and it uses the driver to get that work done. Now, the way it works when you're doing a buffered upload, the web browser does an HTTP post, and we build up a buffer in memory and the controller logic. And once that's there, we can then pass that buffer over to the database logic. The database logic can then just do an insert with the buffer. And this is by far the simplest way to get files up and into the database. Of course, downloads work exactly the same going back down. But there are a couple of downsides related to memory. As you can see, we're building up buffers in the mid-tier. And so depending on the file size and the number of concurrent users you have doing these types of uploads, you may run into issues depending on the amount of memory or RAM that your Node.js server has available to it. The other way, perhaps more efficient, but does require more code to get this done, is via streams. And so the way that this works, we still get the post, and once that comes in, rather than build up the buffer, the first thing we do is actually go over to the database logic and perform an insert, and we just insert an empty blob, and we're going to use that as a handle of sorts. And then we can start streaming data in. It just goes bit by bit. We're doing small buffers, relatively small compared to what we were doing with buffered inserts, but we just stream that data in, and then once it's all over, we can go ahead and commit the transaction, and we're done. The advantage of this, although it takes more code, is that it scales far, far better for concurrent users in larger files. So the pattern that we're looking at today is the transform stream. And what I'll do, I'll start walking you through this logic at the router level. So we'll go into services and router, and you can see what I have here is the previous route for employees. So if you were following along in the series on building a REST API on the employees data, that is or should be familiar. And then below that, I have an endpoint, a new endpoint for files. And this endpoint is for the actual file content, the physical files themselves, if you will. So insert, update, and, well, not update, but get a file, insert a file, and delete a file, basic DML. And then the other endpoint, file details, is sort of like metadata or just data related to the file, but not the actual file content itself. allows you to get that information out. So what we're going to focus on is the post route here. So the files controller is located here. We can take a look at that. And again, we're doing the post. So here's our post. And notice that above the post, what I have here is a new class. And this is extending the transform stream that comes with Node.js, brought in here via the stream API. So I'm extending that with a new class that I'm calling file validator. And so in the constructor function, I'm setting up a few defaults, such as total bytes and buffer, which is 0 to start. I do have a max file size that we can use to make an adjustable file validator, if you will, for different max sizes. And then we have this transform method here. The underscore means that we're the implementer of this transform stream. So this is where we would do that logic. So basically, as a transform stream, the whole idea is, when the request object comes into the web server, the request itself is a readable stream. And what we want to do is go to the database and get a writable stream, and we want to hook these two up with a pipe. But rather than do that directly, because we wouldn't have the ability to put any logic in between, what we're doing is creating a transform stream to go in between, where we can add any kind of business logic we want. So here we have that type of business logic where I'm tracking the file size as it comes across. So this method will be invoked each time we get a new chunk coming in from the client. And so I'm just checking the total bytes streamed across so far. I should change that name because it's not really in the buffer, just total bytes streamed, if you will. And if it exceeds the max, then we can throw an error and just stop the stream, stop any downstream movement. So what I do inside the HTTP post handler is I get a new instance of the file validator. You can see I'm doing that here, setting a default max file size of 50 megabytes. And once I have that, the logic was a lot simpler than what we had with the previous implementation using async iterators. Basically, all I needed to do was take the request object and pipe it into the file validator. Now, pipe returns the destination, which is the file validator. So once I have that reference, I can then call the create method for the database APIs, and I'm passing the file name and content type. These both came from HTTP headers. But the last one, the content stream, is just the destination that I'm piping to. So I'm using the transform stream as the destination, or the handoff or interface, if you will, between the controller logic and the database logic. This is how I can handle that separation of concerns I was talking about before. So in the database logic for a post, which is here, the create, you can see that it's taking that transform stream here, the content stream, and the very first thing it does, it executes this create SQL here, which inserts into a table an empty blob, essentially just allowing us to get a handle or pointer back on that. Once we have that, we can then get a reference to it, and then we take the stream that we were passed, and we pipe that into the lob, or the writable stream, the destination, the final destination, if you will, into the database. We just set up some listeners for errors in case they occur. We can close our connection. And when the lob is finished streaming, we go ahead and commit the transaction and then resolve our promise, passing along the primary key of the newly inserted record into the database. So that's it at a high level. And I can show you this working. What I broke right before the call is the downloadability, so I can't demonstrate that. I'll just open this in a terminal, get the application. Oops, it's already running over here. So let me shut that down, clear that out, start it back up, and refresh this. So you see I have a couple files already in the database. I can delete those, and we'll browse to upload a couple new files. So one you can see relatively small, the other is easily going to exceed the 50 megabyte max. So we'll select both of those, hit upload. First one's already in the database, second one errored out. We can see that error there. once it's up, and I can show you in the HR schema, the destination table, even though I can't download them, you can, of course, verify that they're uploaded here into that destination table. So that's it in a nutshell. As I mentioned before, I plan on doing a blog post. In fact, I'll have to launch that series in the next few days at the latest. And so I'll, of course, supply details as well as sample code that walks you through the 3 implementations, the buffered, the async iterator, and then the transform stream implementation, so that you can go through those and put them into your own applications. So that's it for the starter icebreaker. If anybody has any questions about this or anything else related to note-oracledb, we're just going to open up to your questions at this point. See some new faces here with us today. Questions for you guys. Anybody here already using note-oracledb or just considering using note-oracledb? Had any good experiences or bad experiences you want to let us know about? You have the lead developer right here. Now's your time. Give them a hard time. See, some folks are starting to experiment with it. Are you starting to experiment with Node.js or starting to experiment with the Oracle database driver for Node.js? Getting started with both. Really, the database interactivity, that's critical for you. So did you happen to stumble on the series I mentioned before, the REST API series? Just in case you've not, let me share my screen again. I'm just going to show you how to find that. So this is JSAO.io, JavaScript and Oracle. If you go there and scroll down a bit, you'll see creating a REST API. Oops. Go down to the one with the graphic on it. That's sort of the anchor post, if you will. And this post has several parts that'll explain at a high level some web server and database basics, and then walk you through a basic CRUD style API. So if you're concerned with that type of thing, this might be a good way to get started. Make sure you're doing things correctly from the ground up. Also, of course, the great thing about this series is that all of the code is in a Git repo, which you can locate here. This is the Oracle database examples directory or repo in the Oracle account on GitHub, and all of the code is here. So if you have any difficulty as you're working through the series, you can always just jump over here and see what the code should look like by the end. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions coming in the queue. So I guess we'll go ahead and call it here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, look for that series in the next few days on JSAO.io. And we'll see you next time.
All right.
Again,
See you.
take care.
See you, everybody.